In the dark, flicker-lit halls of Hollywood cinema, we have spent decades obsessed with the undead. We imagine a virus, a chemical spill, or an accident cause that stripped away our humanity, leaving behind a hollowed-out shelf driven only by the primal need to consume. We call them zombies, and we take comfort in the fact that they are mere product of our imagination, fables designed to thrill us from the safety of a velvet sweater seat. We tell ourselves that the concept of a hollowed-out slave is pure science fiction, a biological impossibility that could never bridge the gap from the screen to the real world. But if you step away from the silver screen and move into the humid, predator-filled shadows of the tropical undergrounds, you will find that the zombies apocalypse isn't a future threat. It's a present, pulsating and terrifyingly efficient reality. In the brutal laboratory of evolution, there is a fate far more disturbing than being hunted, killed, and eaten. It is the fate that defies the very definition of self. It is the fate of the hijack. Welcome to the realm of mind benders. These are the disputed masters of neurological warfare, parasites, fungi, and specialized wasps that have spent millions of years perfecting the art of biological code-defense. Unlike a traditional predator that views its prey as a simple source of calories, these organisms view their victim as infrastructures. They do not want your life, at least, not yet. They want your will, they want the nervous system. They want to turn your muscle, your legs, and your deepest survival instinct into a vehicle for their own gruesome agenda. Imagine the psychological horror of being a passenger in your own skin. Imagine your brain screaming to run left into the safety of the saddle, while your legs, commanded by a chemical puppeteer, force you to climb right upward toward the light and your own certain destruction. From the zombie ants of the Amazon to the sound surgeons of the insect world, we are counting down the most sophisticated and chilling examples of mind control on Earth. Prepare to witness a world where biology meets pure nightmare. This is Top 7 Mind Benders, Nature's Real-Life Zombie Masters. In the dark, brackish water of the coastline, a nightmare of biological identity thief unfolds beneath the wave. This is the story of Sacculina carsini, a parasitic barnacle that represents the absolute pinnacle of invasive body snatching. To the untrained eye, a barnacle is a harmless, stationary creature filtering plankton from the sea, but Sacculina is no ordinary skeleton. It is a biological phantom that has traded its leg, its shells, and its very dignity for the power of total anatomical control over one of the ocean's most resilient scavengers, the crab. The horror begins when a microscopic female Sacculina larva finds its target. She does not attack the crab with claws or teeth. Instead, she finds a soft cheek in its armor, usually at the joint in the leg. Once she makes contact, she performs a feat of remarkable engineering. She sheds her hard outer shell and injects her entire internal mass, a tiny, undifferentiated clump of the cell, into the crab's bloodstream. At this moment, the crab as an individual has already begun to die. thought its heart continues to beat and its leg continue to move. The intruder is now inside the gates. Once the injection is complete, the parasite does not grow into a recognizable animal with eyes or limbs. Instead, it transforms into riboselephant, a sprawling, yellowish network of roots-like tendrils that spread throughout the crab's entire body. These roots wrap around the crab's digestive tract, its internal organs, and most crucially, its central nervous system. Succulenta does not want to kill the crab yet, it wants to own it. As the parasite matures, it emerges as a pulsating external sac known as externa, located exactly where the female crab would normally carry her own eggs. This is where psychological horror reaches its peak. Through a complex cocktail of chemical signals, Succulenta effectively castrates the host. The crab's own reproductive organs wither away, replaced entirely by the parasite's infrastructure. But the most disturbing transformation occurs in the brain. If the host is a female, the parasite amplifies her maternal instinct, forcing her to treat the parasitic shark with absolute devotion. She will clean it, protect it, and aggressively defend it from predators, convinced that this alien growth is her own unborn brood. However, the mindbender truly proves its mastery when it infects a male crab. Under the influence of the parasite chemical puppetry, the male crab undergoes a forced biological transition. Its abdomen widens to mimic that of a female, his claws stop growing, and his brain is completely rewired. This male crab, which should be fighting for territory, begins to perform the delicate nursery behavior of a mother. He will stand on a high rock, bobbing his body in the current to activate the parasite's egg sac, eventually waving his claw to have the larva of his killer hatch and drift away to infect his own kin. The crab has become a foster mother to its own destruction. It will no longer mold, meaning it can never grow or repair itself, as all his energy is diverted to feeding the golden root of the succulenta. It is a hollowed-out vessel, a biological marionette that has been stripped of its gender, its future, and its will. In the words of the mindbenders, succulenta reminds us that the most terrifying predators aren't those that eat your flesh, but those who rewrite your very soul. The journey of the lancet liver fluke, Dicotyledonum dentricecum, is one of the most complex and sinister multi-stage operations in the natural world. Most parasites are content with one or two hosts, But the liver fluke requires three to complete its odyssey: a snail, an ant, and finally, the warm liver of a grazing mammal like a sheep or cow. The most dramatic and terrifying chapter of this life cycle occurs when the fluke finds itself trapped inside the body of a common wood ant. When an ant accidentally consumes the fluked larvae, most of the parasites settle safely in the ant abdomen, waiting for the next move. But one hero fluke, often referred to by scientists as the brainworm, sacrificed its own life to the glory of its sibling. This single fluke migrates to the ant subesophageal ganglion, the cluster of nerves that control the insect mouthpart and movement. Once there, it installs itself as the ant new pilot. As the sun sets and the air cools, the fluke flips a switch in the ant head, while the rest of the ant colony retreats underground to the safety of the nest. This infected ant begins to behave like a sleepwalking phantom. Under the fluke total command, the ant deserts its post and begins a slow, mechanical climb up the nearest blade of grass. It does not stop until it reaches the very tip, the most exposed and dangerous position possible. Then, the fluke commands the ant to bite down. The ant's mandibles lock into a death grip, so powerful that it cannot be released, even if the ant wanted to. The ant is now a stationary bait, positioned at exactly the right height to be consumed by a grazing sheep. But the most sophisticated part of this mind bender is its sense of timing. If the sun rises and no sheep had eaten the ant, the heat of the day would surely kill both the host and the parasite. Sensing the rising temperature, the fluke released the ant jaw. The ant, suddenly waking up from its nightmare, crawled back down to the shades of the earth to rest and feed its own colony, seemingly normal. But as soon as the shadows lengthen and the air turns cool again, the fluke retakes the wheel. The ant is brought back out of the grass night after night until the fatal encounter finally happens. It is repetitive, neurological hunting that only ends in the stomach of a beast. For millions of years, the honeybee Apis mellifera has been celebrated as the ultimate symbol of order, industry, and collective intelligence. Every movement of a worker bee is governed by a need of the hive, guided by an internal compass that tells it exactly where to forage and when to return home. But there is a tiny shadow lurking in the air, a microscopic predator known as the Apocephalus borealis, most commonly referred to as fruit fly. This fly has discovered a way to shatter the social fabric of the hive by turning its most loyal subjects into zombies, disoriented, wandering spirits that has lost their way home. The invasion begins with a high-speed aerial assault. The female favorite fly is a master of precision. She hovers over a foraging honeybee and, in a split second, stabs her ovipositor into the bee's soft abdominal segment. In that flash, she deposits a cluster of eggs. From the outside, the bee looks unharmed. It continues its work, gathering nectar and returning into the hive. But inside, a biological ticking time bomb has been planted. As the larvae hatch, They don't just eat the bee tissues, they begin to feast on the muscle and nerve that govern the bee complex navigation systems. As the infection takes hold, the bee's behavior undergoes a chilling transformation. Normally, honeybees are demure creatures with a strict curfew. They do not leave the hive at night because it's far too dangerous. However, the fabric fly clover begins to manipulate the bee's brain, effectively short-circuiting its internal clock. The infected bees begin to suffer from a form of neurological restlessness. It starts to wander aimlessly within the hive, and eventually it does the unthinkable. It deserts the colony in the middle of the night. This is a death sentence for the bee, but it is exactly what the parasite requires. Outside the hive, the zombie is drawn to artificial light sources, street lamps, porch light, or windows, with an obsessive, most light frenzy. It will fly toward the light until it is completely exhausted, eventually falling into the ground where it begins to walk in erratic, shaky circles. It is a breathtaking sight, a creature once defined by its grace and purpose, now reduced to a stumbling lost soul that no longer recognizes its own sister or its own home. Scientists believe this parasite forced the bee to leave the hive to prevent the colony's social immunity from kicking in, ensuring that the larva can mature in a safe, isolated environment far from the hygienic behavior of other bees. The final act of this horror story is truly gruesome. After the bee has collapsed from exhaustion, the mature larvae prepare to exit their host. In a scan that looks like it was ripped from an alien horror film, up to a dozen fat, white markers erupt from the bee body. Most frequently, they emerge from the junction between the bee's head and its throat, effectively decapitating their host from the inside out. The headless shell of the beast is left behind on the pavement, while the larvae crawl into the soil and prepare to transform into the next generation of weak hijackers. The zombie fly reminds us that even the most organized societies are vulnerable to the mind benders. It doesn't just kill the bee, it strips away its identity as a social being, turning a productive worker into a lonely, light-chasing ghost. This hive continued its work, unaware that one of its own was piloted by a stranger into the dark. In the damp, leaf-littered wood of the forest floor, the amber snail Socinia lives a life defined by an extreme caution and subterranean instinct. It is a creator of the shadows, programmed by millions of years of evolution to flee from the sun and hide beneath the cold moisture of decaying vegetation. To an amber snail, light is synonymous with dehydration and death, but when its humble muscles accidentally consume the microscopic eggs of the parasite platform Lycochloridium parasitisms, often found in bird droppings, its cautious biological internal clock is not just disrupted, it is violently overwritten by a flamboyant and suicidal script. The invasion begins at the platform larva hatch and navigate toward the snail digestive system. From there, they undergo a transformation that sounds like a plot from a body horror film. They grow long, tube-like structures called broxark, pushing vessel packed with hundreds of tiny larvae. These rocksack migrate through the snail's soft tissues until they reach the most prominent and sensitive part of its anatomy, the long, retractable eye stalk. As the parasite pushed into these narrow corridors, it swelled with such force that snail can no longer retract its eyes into a safety of itself. The snail is effectively locked in a state of permanent explosion, but the physical instruction is only the beginning of its remarkable masterpiece of mind control. The broadshark is a master of aggressive mimicry. As it fills the snail eye stalk, it develops vivid, high contrast bands of emerald green, charcoal gray, and stark white. To a bird flying overhead, this is no longer the dull, fleshy eyes of a snail. They look exactly like succulent, wriggling caterpillar, the ultimate high-protein snack. To make this deception even more irresistible, the parasite pulls rhythmically, throbbing 3 to 4 times per second. This movement perfectly mimics the muscular contraction of a crawling insect. The snail's head has been transformed into a hypnotic neon dance of death, designed specifically to cut the eye of a predator. However, a pushing eye is useless if the snail remains hidden under a lock. This is where the mindbender performs its most impressive neurological feat. Lecrodirium possesses a chemical key that unlocks the snail's most basic survival instinct and flips them upside down. The parasite overrides the snail photophobia, its innate, life-saving fear of light. Instead of seeking the damp safety of the dark, this infected snail becomes pathologically obsessed with the sun. Is compelled by a force itself cannot resist to crawl out under a protective leaf litter, across the open, dangerous ground, and upward. It climbs the stem of plant, reaching for the very highest, most exposed leaf of the forest canopy. Perched at the top of the plant, silhouetted against the sky, the snail sits motionless while its eyes pulse like strobe in the midday sun. It is a biological sitting duck, a living neon sign screaming for attention. Eventually, a bird, usually a sparrow or a crow, spots the caterpillar and squats down with a laser precision. The bird may eat the whole snail, but it simply plucks the pushing eye stalk right off the snail head. For the platform, this is the moment of triumph. It enters the bird's warm gut, where it will mature into an adult and release thousands of eggs through the bird's dropping, scatter the seed of the next nightmare across the forest. The most tragic and resilient part of this story is what happens to the snail if it survives the initial attack. It's only its eye stalk torn away. The snail will retreat into the shadow to heal. Because snails possess incredible regenerative power, it will eventually regrow its eyes, but the mindbender is patient and cruel. The original bird sac remains rooted deep within a snail body, drawing nutrients from its host. As soon as the new eye is fully formed, the parasite will pump them full of flesh larvae, forcing the snail back into the light of a second, third, or fourth round of mutilation. The snail is trapped in a perpetual loop of horror, a permanent, light-seeking slave to pushing nightmare that refuses to let it die. In the world of the off-weather spider, Pelosymeta agrida, life is detected by the precise geometry of the web. This spider is a master architect, weaving intricate circular traps designed to cut flying insects with mathematical perfection. Its survival depends entirely on the structural integrity of this silken net. However, this ancient skill, the spider's very reason for being, is exactly what the parasitic worms Hymenopteric agrohafica seeks to hijack. In a chilling display of neurological salvation, the wasp does not just kill the spider, it turns the spider craftsmanship against itself, forcing the host to build its own tomb. The nightmare begins with a sudden, surgical strike. The female wasp swarms down, stinging the spider and causing a temporary paralysis that lasts only a few minutes. During the brief window of helplessness, the wasp scores a single arc onto the spider's abdomen. When the spider wakes up, it seemingly returns to its normal life, unaware that it is carrying a biological hit killer. For the next 2 weeks, the wasp's larva hatches and begins to grow, puncturing the spider's circuitry to drain its hematomas. The spider continues to build its webs and hunt, but its time is rapidly running out. The mind bending even occurs on the final night of the spider life, just before the larva is ready to pivot. It injects a potent cocktail of chemical into the spider cephalothorax. These chemicals serve to trigger a glitch in the spider complex web building software. The spider begins to build a web, but it is no longer a beautiful, functional ops meant to hunting. Instead, the spider becomes obsessed with a single, repetitive task. It paced back and forth, reinforcing a small number and support cables with an extraordinary amount of silk, creating a structure that is up to 40 times stronger than a normal web. This new creation is the cocoon web, a stripped-down heavy-duty platform designed to withstand the most violent tropical rainstorm and wind. The spider, driven by a hijacked instinct it cannot understand, tirelessly reforms the central half until it is a solid, resilient anchor. It is a masterpiece of engineering, but is entirely useless for the spider. The spider will never catch another fly in this web. It has spent its final surge of energy building a fortress for its killer. Once the domed architect has completed the structure to the larva exact specification, the parasite moves in for the kill. The larva moth kills the spider and consumes its remaining internal organs. With the host body discarded, the larva hangs itself from the center of the reinforced web and spins its own purple cocoon. Thanks to the spider forced labor, the wasp's pupa is now safely suspended high above the ground, protected from predator and the elements of the silken anchor that took a lifetime to instinct to create. The horror of the spider wasp lies in the total preservation of the life work. The spider's most complex behavior, the building of its web, is the very tool used to ensure its extinction. It dies not just at a meal, but at a food labeled, spending its last conscious moment meticulously preparing the world for the creator that will take its place. In the dark theater of the mind benders, the spider is the ultimate tragic figure, an artist forced to paint its own funeral shroud. In the world of predator insect, most hunters rely on speed, venom, or brute force to subdue their prey, but the immoral cockroach wasp, Ampullate compressor, also known as the jewel wasp, is not a mere hunter. It's a highly skilled, cold-blooded negotiator. It targets it to the American cockroach, an insect nearly twice its size, faster, and notoriously difficult to kill. While most predators would simply devour such a prey, the jewel wasp has a much more disturbing plan. It doesn't want a dead male, it wants a living, breathing, and walking nursery that won't fight back. The surgery begins with a lightning-fast aerial ambush. The wasps grapple with the much larger cockroach and deliver a tactical first sting to the cockroach. This internal dose of venom is designed to temporarily paralyze the cockroach's front legs, preventing it from running away or fighting back. With the victim stabilized, the wasp then performs its masterpiece of biological horror. It carefully maneuvers its stinger into the cockroach's head, filling the exact location of the subesophageal ganglion, the brain cluster that controls the escape reflex. With the precision of a scalpel, the wasp injects a specific cocktail of neurotransmitter directly into the rat's brain. This is not a lethal venom. Instead, it is a chemical lobotomy. Within minutes, the cockroach recovers its ability to move. Its legs are no longer paralyzed, and it can walk perfectly fine. But something fundamental has vanished. Its will. The cockroach's brain can no longer initiate the fight or flight response. It is now a biological hollow, a soul surgeon's success story. It sits calmly, cleaning its antennae as it doesn't have a care in the world, while its killer stands right in front of it. The wasp then takes the cockroach by one of the armpits and begins to lead it. Because the cockroach is too heavy to wasp to carry, the wasp simply walks the zombie like a dog in a leash. The roach follows obediently, its leg moving in perfectly rhythm, jazzed and compliant, walking straight toward its own tomb. The wasp leads the roach into a pre-prepared burrow, a dark hole from which the roach will never emerge. Once inside the burrow, the wasp lays a single white egg on the cockroach leg and then exits, sealing the instant with pebbles and debris to keep other predators out. Inside the darkness, the cockroach remains alive and healthy for days, but it doesn't try to dig it out. It doesn't try to kick off the eggs. It simply stands at a state of chemical bliss, waiting. When the wasp's larva hatches, it bored into the croc abdomen and begins its internal organs in a very specific order, saving the host and the nervous system for the last ensure the meal stays fresh as long as possible. The horror of the yellow wasp lies in the total erasure of the self. The cockroach is physically capable of escaping, its muscles are strong, and its legs are functional, but the mind-bender has stolen the very idea of freedom from its mind. It died not in a frantic struggle for life, but in a quiet, drug-induced stupor, a living louder for the creator that stole its soul before it stole its life. At the summit of our countdown sits an undisputed king of biological horror, a creator so terrifyingly effective that it inspired modern post-apocalyptic fiction. This is Ophiocordyceps euthanalis, the zombie ant fungus. While the other mindbender on our list rely on surgical sting or complex larva hack, this fungus operates on a scale of a total semantic takeover. It does not just influence the host, it wears the host body like a biological suit, turning a living insect into a high-precision machine designed for one purpose, its own extinction. The invasion begins with a silent, invisible rain of microscopic pores falling from the rainforest canopy. When a single spore lands on a rainforest carpenter ant, it uses specialized enzymes to melt through the ant's exoskeleton. Once inside the bloodstream, the fungus does something truly alien. Instead of headhunting the brain, it begins to multiply into a massive, interconnected web of fungal cells that wrap around the ant's muscle. Research has shown that the fungus actually leaves the ant brain intact. It prefers to keep the pilot conscious while it hijacks the controls, communicating with the ant swarm through its own independent cellular network. As the infection reaches its peak, the puppet master begins its grand performance. The ant is seized by a series of full-body convulsions that force it to stagger away from the safety of its colony. Driven by a chemical command it cannot ignore, the ant begins a slow, mechanical climb. The fungus knows exactly what it needs: a microclimate with precisely 94% to 95% humidity and a temperature between 20 to 30 Celsius degree. It forced the ant to climb to the height of exactly 25 centimeters above the forest floor, no higher, no lower. At this precise altitude, the fungus delivers the final command. The ant is forced to crawl until the underside of the leaf and sink its mandible into the main vein to a dead grip. The fungus then causes the ant jaw muscle to atrophy and lock, permanently anchoring the insect to the leaf. The ant is now prisoner of its own anatomy, pinned its final resting place. Within hours, the fungus finally kills the host, consuming its internal organs to fuel the next stage of its gruesome transformation. Days later, a nightmare sprout erupts from the back of the ant head. A long, winged stalk grows upward, topped with a bulbous fruiting body. This is the fungus spore tower. Positioned perfectly 25 centimeters above the ground, the tower begins to rain down thousands of new spores onto the train and train below, creating a zone of death where any passing ant is likely to be the next victim. The ant corpse remains clamped to the leaf for weeks, a silent, hollow-out movement to the fungus' absolute power. The horror of Ophiocordyceps dissects fly in its sheer biological coolness. It treats the ant life as a mere logistical detail, a disposable engine to transport its spore into the perfect coordinates. It is a master of the long game, a silent architect of the death that has been turning ants into puppets for over 48 million years. It proves that in the natural world, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one that bites your neck, it's the one that moves your legs for you.